Well, if you're all here for leveraging technology for compliant HCP engagements, you're in the right place. And good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar. As I said, leveraging technology for compliant HCP engagements. This webinar is another in the series of core data compliance webinars. And each webinar is designed to provide you with greater understanding of issues and challenges confronting compliance professionals. Our goal is to really simplify what appears to be a complex compliance world to make it easier and more effective for you to operate. Today, I am pleased to have Juan Tessie with us. Juan is a senior manager in Deloitte's Life Sciences Regulatory, Legal, and Compliance Practice, serving biotech, pharma, medtech firms. He leads global teams and technology-enabled transformation projects. I can't even talk today. He really leads global teams and technology-enabled transformation projects to support compliance officers, operations professionals, and legal counsel to help them better serve patients and manage risk. Thanks for being with us today, Juan. And I am Jim Dawson, the VP of Compliance Solutions at Core Data, and I'll be serving as your moderator and even providing some of my insights to what may be, I think, a very informative session today. Just so you know, I have basically 30 years of pharmaceutical biotech experiences with about 15 years as a compliance officer. So I will say developing and implementing an effective and efficient compliance program that meets government expectations while providing your company a competitive advantage is a challenge, especially when you're trying to establish the right corporate culture. So today we continue the process to help you rethink your compliance approach. And today's webinar is going to emphasize the intersection of technology and compliance with HCP engagements. So Juan, again, thank you for joining us today. You need to go back a slide, please. Juan, it's great to have you with us. And I'm just going to sort of let you know the format that we hope to use today is that I'll sort of talk to some of these slides and we'll bring Juan in to give us more depth and insights from his perspective and his expertise. So with that, we'll get started. And I think we all know pretty much what HCP engagements are, but I'm going to review those very quickly. Is when we are out contracting with a physician to really provide a service or for us, such as a speaking program, consulting, or other engagements. We need to make sure that when we do, we have a legitimate business purpose, we pay them a fair market value, and we can basically make sure that they've done what we've paid them for. So, and I think there's always some compliance challenges that we're trying to meet to make sure we get the transfers of value captured. We got to make sure that we are not violating any Stark or anti-kickback laws. We make sure that we're also adhering to any good privacy or HIPAA requirements. And I think in addition to that, we saw a change once COVID hit us and we moved to a more digital platforms and digital ways of thinking. So with that, we really want to get into sort of say, how did technology change things and sort of how can we leverage good technology to improve our HCP engagements. Juan, I mean, is there anything you would like to add as I kick that off to set the stage as we move forward?
Yeah, Jim, and thank you for having me. Excited to be here. I think as you said, kind of the overarching theme is, tools, technologies, leading practice have evolved so much over the last couple of years, certainly COVID, but also generally with AI, with compliance modernization and being, I think, a key focus, efficiency and how we use resources. Just so much change over the last couple of years that I think a very salient topic, and excited to be here and to share some of the trends that we're seeing here at Deloitte with some of our life science clients.
That's great. And thank you for joining us again. And also, just so you know, if you have questions as we're going through those, please put that into the on the website, and we'll get to those as we go through. I'm counting on our people behind the scenes to keep us on track and making sure we're seeing those questions so we can address those. But let's get into it right off the bat, and that's sort of digital payment tracking systems. And I think we all look at those in multiple ways, but we got to sit down and think about the various what I'll say various ways we look at these programs, from automated tracking of payments or transfers of values. You know, they're streamlining the processes for, financial payments and interactions with healthcare professionals. And so we need to utilize those effectively. We have to make sure that we're looking at it from a regulatory assurance. There's several systems and processes out there to help us with that, so we can make sure we're adhering to, one, the Sunshine Act, but also making sure we're not having any deleterious relationships with our healthcare professionals. And, basically, it's also having a simplified reporting processes. And I think there are good solutions out there that are helping with that, and enhancing transparency and accountability, which is always important. And I know, Juan, that you guys have been consulting and helping many of your clients with that. Any insights you can help us with in this area?
Yeah, and I'd say kind of digitization of the end-to-end process, I think it'll be a key theme here today. And it starts, I think, with technologies like this. So what we're seeing companies utilize more tech to capture both, the transfers of value on the front end for reporting purposes, but also for second and third line of defense purposes. We'll talk about in a little bit. But the QR kind of illustration here reminds me really of sign-in sheets is one example, right? When we think of speaker programs and other areas where you need to track HCP attendance. So often these tools can be integrated, and we've seen them integrated directly with sales and call planning systems, in addition to HCP engagement and transparency reporting platforms, right? So QR code, something we've often seen when we visit maybe a new office. We're seeing more and more of that to track, say, speaker program attendees, and have all that information flow through in a pretty frictionless fashion through your speaker bureau systems, through HCP engagement, through your transparency, both from a compliance perspective, but also from a knowing your customer as well from a commercial perspective.
That's great. If we can move to, and the other thing we're dealing with is automated reporting tools, which are really helping us, I think, streamline some of the compliance reporting activities, potentially error reduction and accuracy improvement. There's a lot of time and resource efficiency, and I would even say some effectiveness that comes through with some of these automated tools. A little get closer to real-time compliance monitoring, and where do we stand with customizable reporting features? One, I know that we all look at these things differently, and we sort of say, how do we use them? How do we help? But from your perspective, where do we go with automated reporting tools?
Yeah, but we've seen a lot of the tools offer some great kind of out of the box features and functionality. They help plan for HCP engagements, they can capture source data. But when it comes to, say, data cleansing for transparency, more intelligent alerts, routings from a compliance perspective, even workflows to make that cleansing more efficient. Some tools can help automate notifications, even to, say, like spend owners, which I think is a big win for compliance teams who are often crunched around disclosure times. Some tools offer some real-time analytics, which we think is great, and we see compliance teams making more use of. And again, typically we see clients starting with out-of-box functionalities, but then tailoring them to their own business rules, requirements, and really kind of the level of involvement, I'd call it, that compliance wants as part of these processes. So no one size fits all, I think, in terms of reporting configurations, but having the ability and the capability there in your tooling is important for then you to configure that to your needs.
So then now we move into the secure data handling. I mean, we always deal with, some of the technologies out there with encryption, We want to make sure we have robust access control, single sign-on, those kind of things. You know, access to transfer portals. Where is that going? Where are we going with those? And how do we make sure that, our sites are secure? And, basically ensure that we have anonymous data and pseudo ization of our data, and basically the continuous data security monitoring. All are challenges, I think, for all of us in the compliance world, but where do we go with it?
Yeah, and I'd add, data handling certainly top of mind, right? As we think of privacy laws in the U.S., certainly, federal, but individual states like California, not to mention GDPR, other national regulations, opt out, as we're seeing more and more of other privacy laws gaining more and more traction. There's variability certainly there and overlap. Businesses are global, but those regulations are often, fragmented. And I think some good technology and good tooling allows you to both not only keep tabs on those changing regulations, but to an extent help manage that on a day-to-day in terms of what data goes where, what data can be disclosed, managing opt-outs, managing pre-approvals, disclosures, and more of these requirements that we've seen emerge here in the US and internationally.
Okay. Yeah, and so we move on, you get that. Now we got transparent disclosure portals. And I know these are challenging in a lot of ways as far as public accessibility of payment information. We're dealing with compliance with regulatory mandates around disclosures, automated data collection and publications. How do we handle that? This is an area that I have to say I'm not very knowledgeable about, as well as the enhanced data integrity and verification. And where do stakeholders' engagement and education all fit in this as well? So when we get into transparent disclosure portals, what are your thoughts there, Juan?
Yeah, I mean, I see it as a continuum, right? With HCP engagement, maybe kind of the start, HCP transparency, you can think of as the last piece, right? And similar to what we noted before, patchwork of US federal, states, ex-US country-specific requirements. I just read that the Netherlands is the latest to move forward on some potential transparency laws. So staying on top of that is, a headache into itself, not to mention all those different reporting data elements, reporting timelines, dispute management, what's required where and when. So automation around disclosures, or maybe automating, I should say, as much as feasible. I think humans will always have to shepherd these processes, but now it's less of a nice to have, and I'd say more of a must have to have both partners and tools that help you stay on top of the regulations, but automate aspects of transparency reporting, dispute management, and those certain things.
As we move on, then, as we're starting to bring this together, is now you have to sit back and say, we have technology, we have with this, but now how do we integrate with compliance programs? And I know we want to make sure that there's seamless data integrations. We don't want to see gaps or deficiencies that come in place. We want to make sure that our compliance workflows are, automated, make it more efficient, more effective for us with real-time monitoring alerts. What are our reporting capabilities and customizable dashboards? All nice, important things to have, everything I think we're all talking about, but where do you see it at this point?
Yeah, I see us tying, very strongly to second and third line monitoring, right? So compliance programs and their day to day, and then also internal audit, activities. So HCP engagement at its core, maybe a commercial and field facing endeavor, right? To engage with those stakeholders, but monitoring and oversight is really a non-negotiable, as we look at regulatory guidance, what CMS, OID, DOJ have said, the recent settlements we've seen around, say speaker programs. So keeping tab on those activities from a compliance and a monitoring perspective is the expectation. So whether that's ensuring defensible fair market value, or that proof of services are in line with contract, monitoring spend caps, utilization limits for HCPs. I feel like compliance has as much a stake in HCP technology and in selecting those and configuring those as do field-facing employees that are those relationship owners, if you will.
Right. Okay. Now we sit down and the latest buzzword and everyone's talking about it and we're all dealing with it, but AI, artificial intelligence, and how are we going to play with that, especially as we start looking at it from a risk assessment standpoint. We have various things that are happening from, with the chat boxes, with the data analytics pieces of it. What can we do from a social media standpoint and communications? But, in the way of HCP engagements, how do we use AI from the contracts to risk patterns to, doing our due diligence, again, getting back to real-time monitoring and alerts that we just talked about, but also predictive modeling for contracts and negotiations. So how's AI coming into this whole picture?
Jim, as you said, all the rage of the last 12 months, and I'm sure many are maybe tired of hearing about it, but at the risk of being, repetitive, certainly some great applications to risk assessment. So feeding, AI engine signals from HCP engagement, from transparency, from public sources, say, on corruption indexes, or news stories that may cover your individual HCPs or HCOs or even vendors. I think, at least from my perspective, haven't seen life science companies find maybe like a magic bullet when it comes to AI compliance, but there are quite a few exciting pilots at some of the more kind of tech forward clients that we work with that are meshing, compliance, HCP, and vendor engagement with more traditional third-party risk management and risk sensing technologies, and kind of within an overlay, within a sandbox, if you will, of AI. And often not compliance leaders necessarily undertaking this on their own. What we've commonly seen is that there may be enterprise AI initiatives. And as part of that, those enterprise initiatives solicit different use cases from different functions, right? And I think having compliance, raise their hand to say, hey, there might be some great use cases here. One of these, as an example, is often where it can help piggyback off of those more enterprise efforts to drive some really, I think, neat and effective compliance use cases.
So from that one, where do you see the downside or where the pitfalls are for AI especially when it comes to HCP engagements?
I'd say governance, and I'll maybe broaden it out a little bit. So we're talking about HCP engagement, but compliance, I think, also has a very large role to play in the governance of these AI models, especially if you think of, say, generative models. So both, internally facing, we've seen compliance departments stand up, say, like intelligent chatbots, right? That might guide a field person to say, hey, can I do this with an HCP, right? So you kind of want to balance, the accuracy of that model with the utility of that model, and governance of that, getting the right information that can't be necessarily misinterpreted or steer users in a wrong path that may be non-compliant, has been a challenge. So both internally and certainly externally facing as well. We've seen many kind of snafus in the news, right, of where generative AI models may have put things out there in the public that were unflattering at the very least, and in some cases just flat out either incorrect or raise some pretty significant regulatory concerns.
That's great. Thank you on that one. So now you have the AI, and I know we're all thinking about, well, how does that help you? Can we go back a slide, please? You're ahead of us. Thank you. And so we have the AI. People are thinking, well, that can help with some of my auditing and monitoring. But let's get back to basics. I think let's talk about, sort of what are the capabilities from a technology standpoint, from real-time monitoring outside of AI and including AI. But where other we look at is from a comprehensive auditing features, basically compliance checks that we need to have in place to make sure that we're engaging physicians or healthcare professionals in the right way, and they have the right backgrounds or whatever we're looking for. And then how do we integrate that, or what do we see integrating with existing systems? And then the piece I always like to know about is that's great. Let's analyze this, and then where do we get the predictive compliance or predictive analysis coming into play with technology?
Yeah, it's similar to what we mentioned before. Tech-enabled second and third line monitoring is less of a nice to have and a must have these days, both from an efficiency perspective, but also kind of to make the highest and best use, right, of your compliance professionals. So real time to get ahead of emerging issues, and also retroactively, right, as technology is not only as a time saver, but as a central spot to manage your interactions with HCPs, to serve as a repository for all the documentation that you would need to support, say, an HCP engagement. For companies that, knock on wood, get some regulatory scrutiny, the ability to say, yes, here's all the information on this engagement, all organized in one neat place, and this is the process and the controls that we have to make sure that that is followed. It is extremely powerful, I think, in those difficult situations. We've seen a lot more these days around transactional monitoring and risk scoring as well. So you're digitizing all this information. Certainly compliance is involved in kind of the workflows and the approvals of these engagements, but we're seeing more and more tooling and technology that can be fed with HCP engagement data, with transparency data, with contracting data, and identify, okay, for a given transaction, what are my risks with this vendor, right? Are there any maybe kind of negative news articles out there? Is it a very high amount of payment? Have I engaged with this HCP, multiple times, and kind of bubble to the top and rise to the surface? A more tailored, narrowed, focused set of transactions and interactions, maybe as I'll call them, for compliance to really dig in, or audit to really dig in and look at. So helping make some prioritization out of mountains and mountains and growing mountains of data that organizations are generating these days.
Right. And so when we move, then, when you talk about mountains and mountains of data, various disparate systems, now we have to sit down and talk about, we need to bring vendors in most cases to help us in putting a lot of this together, and with the various techniques and systems and available technology. So collaboration with vendors, I mean, there's many ways we can look at that as well, because we also look at it. So what do we need to do with our HCPs when we engage them? Or are there other engagements we need to be looking at relative to HCP engagements and collaboration wise? So, the selection process, the audit process, we sort of talked a little bit about a little bit. And then what are our requirements for the HCPs, and how does that help with them and vendors, such as speaker program vendors, and how we work with them as well, and with HCPs, and then monitoring and collaborations and communications. And I think one of the things we always look at is training and what other support we need to have. So all challenges, but where do we go with it now?
Yeah, I think that there's certainly some basics, right, of collaborating with your vendors and having a seamless experience with them. Certainly, as we all get more used to the web, more modern UIs, more modern interfaces, I think what we've seen is HCPs having higher expectations on the technologies that their partners, say pharma device manufacturers, have, right? So a lot of these HCP engagement tools, as one example, are using more and more web-based portals, web-based platforms, and moving away from email. Some of the newer generation of HCPs like that a lot more. Not a magic bullet, especially HCPs that are maybe a little more advanced in their careers. They're still a little averse from doing everything on a web-based platform. But for the newer generation, certainly something that's almost rising to an expectation at this point. So from that HCP perspective, we're seeing a lot more interest and a lot more capabilities coming out of tools that are now available in the marketplace. And maybe one other perspective around broader CLM, when we think of contract lifecycle management. So one trend that we're seeing accelerate the consideration and the implementation adoption of HCE engagement tools is as part of broader CLM ecosystem. So, for example, having a seamless transition between identifying an HCP need, managing those contract negotiations at red lines, obtaining signatures, creating a PO requisition, managing invoice, doing all that reconciliation. We're seeing more and more of this, both to give internal employees a very modern, streamlined process between not just your HCP engagement tool, but also your Coupas and Arebas of the world, your ERP systems, your DocuSigns, and also, again, to give HCPs a more modern and seamless experience. We've often seen that as part of those broader initiatives and projects, it's also an easier, I would call it an easier sell, if you will, to have an HCP engagement tool or implementation considered as part of that typically much larger, project. There's I think a very strong case to be made, relative effort and relative dollars in mind of a CLM implementation versus maybe something which is a little smaller, like an HCE solution, kind of piggybacking HCE into broader CLM. We see more and more clients kind of undertake, and in a way that I think it makes a lot of sense, right? Because if you're doing both at the same time, you can really set up some very kind of tight and impressive integrations and seamless experiences across the life cycle.
And with that, then how do you get into the training support of that and support of that, one? I mean, can we go back? Because I guess I'm sitting down thinking about training. No, you're fine. I'm sorry. Go ahead. I'm sorry. I was a little ahead behind myself. But as we get into education and training around all these areas, especially just what you came off of is in the contract management piece of it and support that we need to have. What is the critical pieces relative to education? I know we have to make sure we have competence and confidence and knowing how to engage and work with physicians or healthcare other healthcare professionals. We want to make sure we're still minimizing the risk we have when we do engage with an HCP. We want to make sure they're not debarred or those simple things, but there's more to it than just that. And how do you use it to promote a culture of compliance? And then how do we use technology in this case around training and education to basically stay ahead of regulatory changes or government new regulations that we're working with? And then with that training and education, how does that help facilitate the adoption of the new technology?
Yeah. So I think internally and externally facing, right? So internally, when we think of a company's employees, we're seeing a lot of interest around, say chatbots, right? The ones I mentioned before, maybe AI powered chatbots that help get kind of very bite-sized information to an employee without them having to go through potentially a lengthy policy. Policies we're also seeing maybe move away from being kind of large tomes to being principles based, as we refer to them, and a bit more digestible. So instead of giving a prescriptive answer to every possible scenario and situation, being a little bit higher level and principles based. Internally, I think the training has also gotten much better as well in terms of interactivity, even beyond compliance. So modern LMS systems, and then partnering with vendors that create modern interactive training, certainly also a trend. Externally facing for HCPs, I think one very notable one, we've had several clients, again, technology heavy clients, or technology forward clients, I should say, for an HCP perspective, start pioneering models where you may in the past have had your traditional speaker programs where an opinion leader might share with his peers what he's seeing around a disease state or a new product. What we're seeing more and more is online, recorded, and on-demand type content. So speaker programs are still very much thing and necessary for many manufacturers, but we're seeing folks start to pioneer portals where HCPs can go get certified that they indeed are an HCP, and then go see maybe that exact same speaker program that they could have attended and had to take time off, and the company would have had to pay for dinner or what have you, go and pull it on demand, right? And in their own time and the comfort of their office, they can go and learn about, the latest product or the latest about this new disease state, and still within kind of the realm and the bounds of a company and what they choose to put on there. But from an efficiency perspective, a cost perspective for the company, certainly from a risk perspective, when we think of kickbacks and the scrutiny that speaker programs have had in general, I think it's a very interesting concept. And one that I think that HCPs are looking for more as well, right? Especially after COVID, why drive, go to a program, et cetera, when I can get the same thing much more efficiently from the comfort of my office. And again, not going away, because certainly part of that I think is networking with peers and the interactions that come beyond, right, the content that's being presented. For a training perspective, what we're seeing quite a bit of buzz around those portals, and companies establishing kind of a go-to place, a go-to repository for a given HCP to have all the resources in one place around a company's PI, new indications, really a one-stop shop. So I think that's gaining more and more momentum.
That's great. Next slide, please. And so, so now you have all this in place, you got this. So now how do we look at it from a continuous improvement process? How do we do, historically we've done performance reviews. We look at, adoption of agile methodologies. We look at, we hear this over and over, is we want data-driven decision making. The stakeholder engagement and feedback is, loops we always talk about, and then let's always benchmark and have best practices. But how's technology going to help us with that?
I think by being, at least from what I've been seeing, a little more responsive to emerging risks, right? So where in the past you may have had data that on a weekly basis, on a monthly basis, filtered up to a compliance team. I think right now, especially with these modern HCP engagement transparency tools, you have an almost real-time view into what's occurring. And I think that the larger question that our clients are wrestling with is the data might be there, right? We have the data, that may be the easier part, but what do we do with it? How do we organize that kind of the mountain of data to really identify what may be emerging risks? So that I see as the biggest challenge. And then, what do we do, right? So we identify an emerging risk. Kind of what's my decision tree? What's my process that I follow to say, okay, I need to either do some field monitoring, right, to understand a little bit more about what this particular HCP or sales rep is doing and saying, or I may need to look at this third-party vendor. May need to look at training, right? Because this particular kind of requirement that we have in our policy just keeps getting missed and missed and missed. So identifying what those trends are, and then I think having a good defined, path by which to remediate that. I think we're also seeing quite a bit of, I'll call them maybe ticketing systems, but kind of workflow management, right? Where moving away from email in terms of, okay, we have an emerging risk. It has to go through a couple of process steps, update some training. So what we would typically see, say, like in an internal audit, right? If there's a finding in an internal audit or like an emerging issue that gets tracked in the system, there's some type of management action, and systems tend to help stay on top of that. I think we're seeing more and more around that with compliance, right? So for that second line monitoring, systems to help both identify the issues, but then help compliance teams kind of stay on top of and track. And again, knock on wood, if you have a regulatory agency come in or some kind of scrutiny, be able to say, yes, not only do we identify the issue proactively, but here's the documentation of the steps that we took to address it or to mitigate it in the future.
Right. And so when you look at that, is we've been through all that. Now then we're in with it. We have all this technology. We're working through some of the HCP engagement pieces, but where does it do with the consultant bringing in legal experts to help with, as far as, I know we talk a lot with, making sure we are in compliance. We have to look at what is the true legal landscapes and how do we use it in some cases to get some customized legal advice, or, helping protect us against litigation, and at the end of the day, is it really helping us facilitate due diligence? How does technology solutions come into this whole realm of working with our legal experts and letting them help guide us as well?
Yeah, so maybe a couple thoughts here. So I think one, just having good tooling, good audit trails, right? Both to track HCP engagements, not only transparency, but HCP engagements, kind of the remediations that I mentioned in the past, the existence of those technologies, the existence of that audit trail, proof of your proactive intent to look for issues, and then making sure that whatever you find is acted upon, I think goes a long way in situations where you do have regulatory scrutiny. CMS transparency audits come to mind. Laws have been around almost a decade, but for the first time ever, I think last year, CMS started actually performing formal audits. And what we're hearing, what we're seeing is, companies that really have done their homework, have kept on top of their assumptions, their documentation, deviations, even as they switched and migrated systems, have done, relatively better as part of those formal audits than have others, right? So just the presence of that technology and tooling, I think, helps make a stronger case for companies' intent to be compliant and do a right thing. And maybe the second thought that comes to mind, I think a lot of the technology vendors, I think, do a good job, and maybe a point to transparency again, but also HCP engagement. One of the benefits of partnering with technology vendors for these types of things is that they often do some of this regulatory research, right? So there's dozens and dozens of global laws, say, around transparency and pre-disclosure. These vendors do that research once, and then they have the benefit that they can then scale that to multiple customers, their entire customer base. Whereas if a company, as a manufacturer, is doing that just for themselves on an individual basis, that's a pretty intense lift. So I think that's another benefit. I don't think necessarily that will always replace formal legal counsel, and often we see that's teamwork, right, between a vendor making a recommendation, legal counsel providing a formal opinion, and often I think consultants also being somewhat of the glue that tie it all together, right? You may have a legal opinion, you might have a tool to support, but then how do you actually operationalize that, right? So how do you stitch it all together, certainly from a integration perspective with not just your tool, but all your other supporting technologies? How do you tie together all your processes? How do you harmonize, say, HCP engagement on a global basis? How do you align your contract templates? I think there's quite a bit even beyond tooling, where consultation with legal experts and consultants can help kind of tie that all together and give you a cohesive, smooth functioning program.
No, I agree with that. The other piece to that for me is knowing when to bring in a legal advice, because there are some things that we can let less other people take on some of those roles that are simple questions or simple processes that maybe a consultant can do without legal, or the vendor may be able to handle that. Yeah, instead of bringing it always to legal where it's to do some of these things for us. So, but I think we always have to make sure we do get that consultation to get us in the right direction and understanding truly the legal risk and what's the best way to sort of mitigate some of that risk. So,
Absolutely.
so before we get into, because we're coming to the end here, before we get into opening it up for questions and answer, Juan, I really want to sort of get back to where we started, which is we're in HCP engagements. We start with the whole process with a needs assessment. We get that done to justify the business. We now are engaging with a physician to actually conduct a specific activity for us, such as an advisory board to be participation there, to the actual screening the debarment, making sure the background checks done, that we're doing okay, to the point of where now we're doing the contract, and then and also once they've done the work, proving that that the proof of performance is, I like to say, they did what they said they were going to do in the contract before we pay that. And so that all comes to an end from end to end. And we've talked about a lot of the individual pieces and what come together, but in your mind, as we go through that whole process, what would be your takeaway on how technology and the current technology and where we are really can enable that, or what hurdles or what barriers should we or pitfalls that we should be looking out for?
Yeah, so yes, absolutely. Technology can enable that and help that. And that kind of continuum as you described it is the standard, right?
Right.
I think where the challenges lie is in, I'll call them maybe edge cases. So I'll use an example. A couple of days ago, we were chatting with a client where we're helping them with an HCP engagement implementation, and we start with that same process, right? So help us understand how you do each piece of that. And maybe a speaker program, an advisory board, maybe fairly straightforward in the US. But the way you do that in Europe might be different. The way you do that in Asia may be different, right? So what do you do? Do you have three separate instances? Do you look to harmonize those processes? To use another example that came up, what if you're engaging with someone that'll incur indirect spend on your behalf, right? So maybe an HCO you're engaging with and they will pay HCPs, right? How do you do that contracting? How do you assure that once you have a contract with that HCO, that they're actually providing you, say, the transparency data once those transfers of value occur? So that continuum, and then considering all the actual kind of in reality how companies execute on that and what that variability might be by activity type or entity type, geography, contracts. Some companies require pre-approvals, some companies require disclosures, sometimes pre-contract, sometimes post-contract. So it kind of very quickly, especially when we think of global manufacturers, very quickly grows in complexity, and it becomes a bit of a trade-off in terms of, okay, where do we harmonize processes, or where do we start maybe making customizations to our tooling and our technology to be able to handle these various permutations and variations in how we engage with HCPs and HCOs.
No, that's great. Because one of the things, and I'd love to hear your insight on this, because my experience has been, is we have a lot of these tools and technology and systems and everything else out there, and we start trying to use them. And what we're doing is allowing the technology or the tool to drive our process, as opposed to understanding our process and utilizing the tools or the technology to better to make our systems or our processes more efficient and effective, and to help in what I would call the process controls, so we don't have process control failures. And if we do, we can identify them earlier. That has always been the challenge I've seen, is, where do we take technology and use it appropriately if we don't have a good process in place?
Yeah, and I think it starts with that process, right? And there's certainly variability, right, in the size of a given company and the complexity, geographic footprint, right? Maybe at one extreme for a small company in the US with some very kind of standard and straightforward contracting procedures. Maybe they only do, speaker programs and some clinical trials and some ad boards. That may be easy, and maybe kind of the general out of the box type configuration for a tool maybe fine. But for many, right, as we start to getting into kind of the mid cap, certainly the large cap, the multinationals, that tends not to be the case. And where we've seen challenges is folks maybe kind of going into it with, I would say, rose-colored glasses, right? To say, okay, we just buy this tool, we flip the switch, and then it works, right? There's quite a bit more to that, as you said, certainly on process alignment, process design, right? Not to mention change management, right? So are users going to know how to use the system? How do you do training around the system? How do you ensure adoption, right? It's challenging, but I think if not done right, it just leads to workarounds, right? If I'm using a tool and at Deloitte, we have a ton of tools, right? And some work great and some not as well, right? And I know personally, sometimes when the tool just doesn't work for what I'm trying to do, the tendency is maybe to send an email, right? Or to somehow do it outside the system. And that somewhat starts to defeat the purpose, right, of having these tools and these central repositories and controls, like you mentioned, to be able to manage these processes.
That's great. Well, Juan, that has been very insightful, and your helping us understand the whole HCP engagement and how you use technology has been very beneficial, at least for me. I've gained a lot of insights. If there are questions from the audience, please post them. We'll be more than happy to address those, and we can go from there.
Terrific. And thank you again for the invite, Jim.
Yeah. So give it a second here, and I'm not seeing questions come in. So I think, Juan, you did a good job of addressing everyone's concerns or questions. So I greatly appreciate your insights again and helping me understand technology relative to HCP engagements. And I think everybody that's in attendance has found it very beneficial. So again, thank you very much.
Likewise. Thanks, Jim.
Thank you all for attending, and stay tuned for our next in the series. And we do make these webinars available to you upon request. And if there's anything we can do to help you, either at Deloitte or through Cordetta, we're here and available to you. Have a good afternoon. Okay, I do believe we're done.
Yes, Jim. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. Fine.
Yeah, Shane, are we everything good there?
Yes. Yes.
Anything you need from me now? So you can go to bed?
No, we'll talk tomorrow.